Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Poor Sarkozy, Napoleon Le Petit, he had been studying some of de Gaulle's speeches, right? There was Vive le Québec libre. He couldn't manage to say Vive la Libye libre. No, no, no. And he was also studying de Gaulle's speech at the Lenin balcony in Moscow, right? Da здравствует Москва, da здравствует Россия. He couldn't do it. He's just hopelessly inferior. And, of course, the fact that he has to lean on Bernard-Henri Lévy, this is ignominious in the extreme. But now in Syria, the Wall Street Journal says the U.S. and the Europeans concede that there's now a stalemate in Syria. It's actually not a stalemate. It's that they're defeated. Because when an aggression breaks down without succeeding, it is a strategic defeat for the Anglo-Americans. That seems to be the tendency. Watch out, though. Ban Ki-moon, hanky-panky-banky, says he wants an attack on Syria. He urges the international community to act against Syria. An unbelievable statement. I'm not sure exactly how he spells it out, but essentially the head of the UN Secretary General of the United Nations calling for war. Back in the charter it says, we've seen the horrors of war twice in a generation, and we want to get rid of it. And now he's calling for it. Not so good. Al Jazeera is desperate. They're throwing up old tapes. You can see it a mile away. They're showing old films of Yemen, old films of Syria to hide the fact that their destabilization has now pretty much come to a halt. And they're reduced to inventing new Jessica Lynch stories. I guess we've got somebody called the Little Gandhi that they've tried to market this past week as the new Jessica Lynch, or Kuwait incubator baby, or the gay girl in Damascus. This marches on, but without very much success. Now, at the United Nations, we're told, and insiders have told me, that the U.S. and the British and the French are pushing like mad for some kind of a tough resolution against Syria, even if it doesn't include military action, something that they can use to keep the crisis going, because otherwise it's like the South Tower. It's just about to be extinguished. So you got to do something. You got to blow it up at this point. We are told that the BRICS are opposing the resolution. Well, I hope they learned something. If they didn't, they're essentially catatonic. The Russian Federation, South Africa, China, India, and Brazil supposedly saying no to any tough resolution. I hope to any resolution about Syria. Time to butt out. They've said what they have to say. Vitaly Churkin on RT, the Russian ambassador, says it's very unwise to have a tough Syrian resolution because the rebels will then use that as a reason to redouble their efforts and essentially foment conflict and war. The Russians want negotiations. Okay, Churkin, again, he needs to repent, not vetoing the Libyan resolution. Again, there's always hope of redemption. I hope that's what we're dealing with here. So therefore, the result is that the death squads of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Ikhwan death squads, have been quelled by the efforts of the Syrian army, with several thousand casualties, several thousand among the security forces. That seems to be grinding to a halt. And there's also this question of the spotlight shifting now to the United Nations. The Palestinians have called for demonstrations worldwide by all Arabs, I would say by all persons of goodwill, against the continued Israeli occupation of the occupied territories, the creation of the Palestinian state. Abu Abbas will speak at the UN on the 23rd of September. That's a Friday, coincides with Friday prayers. It means that you're going to have some pretty big demonstrations across the Arab world in support of Palestinian statehood. The U.S., desperate demagogue Hillary Clinton, trying to head this off as much as she can. She says the Palestinians have to drop their plan to declare a state via the UN General Assembly. The Israelis have said, if you go ahead with this, we're cutting off all of our treaties. You get no more money. No more money from the U.S., no more money from the Israelis. Well, maybe Monsieur the Saudis can come forward. We're told, basically going back to June, that famous op-ed by Prince Turki al-Faisal, that if the United States vetoes the creation of a Palestinian state, the results for U.S.-Saudi relations will be catastrophic. check my book, 9/11 Synthetic Terror Made in USA. You will see the Saudis had already sent the U.S. a parting of the ways ultimatum in the summer of 2001, right before 9/11. The Saudis essentially say they're coming to the end of the line with the U.S. This alliance is now worthless to them. They may act on this, and one of the things would be to replace that money. The mob in Egypt, I'm not clear whose mob, but a mob has attacked the Israeli embassy. The friction between Israel and Turkey continues. They're somewhat under siege there, and above all because the Israeli masses are showing that they don't like the warmonger austerity policy imposed by Netanyahu. So all of that happening. Watch out for big doings next week, right? There may be some attempt to derail the whole thing, as, for example, with a false flag event. Since last Friday night, given the it's been up on my website, but what I discussed with you last week was the constellation of factors pointing to a false flag, from the Pentagon budget to the questions involving Israel and everything else. False flag alert, orange alert on that. In Afghanistan, we had a kind of a mini Tet. Remember the attack during the Tet offensive by the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese against the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. Ellsworth bunker almost killed, tremendous firefight, something similar at the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan. Crocker says it's not a Tet. Well, when RPGs slam into the walls of your embassies, that's Tet in my book. This time, of course, the U.S. media, more controlled, they don't show it. The U.S. blames the Haqqani network. Notice that the U.S. supports the traditional Taliban. The Pakistanis have bargained with the Haqqani network. Who knows what's going on with this? So that, I think, is the panorama from Libya to Syria to Palestine to Afghanistan. Now, we're going to have to shift back into economics to use our time well. The question is what to do here in the United States. It's becoming more and more clear that Obama's jobs program is no job program. There's nothing to do with jobs in this entire package. It is largely, maybe not exclusively, but largely an attack on Social Security disguised, camouflaged as a job program. It's not going to create jobs, but what it will do is to destroy, undermine, and sabotage the long-term or even medium-term financial solvency of Social Security. I hope to get some commentators on this, but one thing that many have pointed out is just by bringing Social Security into a budget deficit debate, this is already sabotage because this was kept separate. The Social Security accounts are separate. And if money is transferred, then U.S. Treasury securities have got to be left behind. And those are not IOUs. That's the most solid paper in the world, as paper goes. So therefore, what Obama's trying to do is to perpetuate this cut in the Social Security payroll tax for wage earners, to extend that to businesses, and to make sure that the theoretical crisis point for Social Security, which never needs to arrive, but right now it's about 2035, 2037, to bring that closer, of course. He is an implacable enemy of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. It's what he told the Washington Post in the week before he took power. Now, the answer to this, we know what it is. It's a stimulus, but it's a credit stimulus that is dictated to the Federal Reserve by some political force, which could and should include you. And how to lean on bend, how to jawbone bend into doing what you want, that's the question when we come back in a minute.